Dropbox a couple of years back decided to move some of their workloads from the cloud into their own co-located data center. Right? In their own words, in their SEC filing, they called it low-cost, custom-built infrastructure in co-location facilities. And this one move of theirs saved them about $75 million over a period of 2 years. $75 million is a significant amount of money, right? Maybe for Dropbox, it was slightly smaller, but it was still significant. And I admit, once you move to the cloud, moving back to your own data center or building your own service is not an easy job. But if you're someone like an Asana or a Slack, where your cloud cost is about anywhere from 50 to 63% of your total cost of revenue, then it's not something that you can ignore, right? It's certainly very significant. Now, this is largely true for infrastructure as a service and even platform as a service, because as you're kind of growing, you tend to consume a lot of these services. But the same principle applies for anything as a service, in fact, right? Could be software, could be other services, anything as a service, literally, XaaS, right? This applies to across the board. Now, one other part of this thing is a lot of companies that I've seen, software service providers, software as a service providers, also drastically end up changing their commercial models. For example, at some point I consumed the software that was, the licensing model of it was pretty straightforward, right? They had a basic user license and they had a pro user license. If I had 10 basic users and 5 pro users, I had to essentially pay for that much year on year. At some point, they suddenly changed their business model, saying that, we're going to do away with this per user model. We'll charge you only based on the amount of data that you move into the software instance. It's a data transfer cost. Now, suddenly this kind of upended our entire model, in which our business model, right? We had budgeted a certain amount of cost towards this particular software. And we knew that there were 10 people using it, 15 people using the software. And now all of a sudden, my cost not only became 2x or 3x of what I was spending before, but the way I looked at the software completely changed. And this essentially leads to a bit of a trust deficit between the consumer and the XaaS service provider. In summary, what am I saying is, see, when you're running a XaaS business, you obviously have your own constraints. You need to change your business model. You need to change the billing model a lot of times. But the only thing I would say is put yourself in your customer's shoes, right? And the reason for this is cost, even if it's not a concern at in the initial stages, starts becoming a huge concern as we go along. And that's something that you as a service provider certainly cannot ignore. Okay, and that's something that I would really say, keep that as one of your primary North Star goals. Understand your customers' needs as far as the cost and commercials are concerned. The second point I want to talk about is only promise what you can deliver. Okay, and a small a story behind this. In one of my earlier roles, we were an organization that had thousands of employees, both distributed across the country. And most people, as the case maybe within each of your organizations, WhatsApp had become the de facto mode of communication between people. And I'm probably already preaching to the choir. I don't need to tell this to all of you, but WhatsApp is not the best idea, right? It's not the ideal mode of communication. So we had embarked on a mission to kind of replace WhatsApp and give all our employees a better tool to really communicate with each other, right? Something that we had control over. We knew that there was no sensitive data leaking through the system. New employees who joined the organization were by default activated on this platform. Employees who left us had to be decommissioned or rolled off this platform. There were a whole bunch of requirements. And another key requirement was we wanted to have this embedded into an existing employee application that was there, so that employees do not have to download or deal with multiple apps on their phone. So during our search, we came across this organization that had something that looked great, right? It worked. Chat worked beautifully. The user interface obviously was a little different from WhatsApp, but we felt that this is something that can certainly be bridged. That's not really a challenge. And the cost was great as well. It was it came at a very competitive price point. But there were two requirements that we needed that weren't there. One of them was we needed to sync with our company's directory, right? So that when employees join the organization or leave the organization, they can the user management is automated. The second part of the requirement was we wanted user groups to be created automatically based on the reporting hierarchy. So if there was a manager who had 2 levels below him or her, with let's say 50 employees, we automatically wanted this to be a group, like a WhatsApp group on this chat platform, so that certain conversations could be had within that group, and nobody really needed to explicitly create a group or not create a group. This particular vendor recognized what our requirement was, and they had told us that yes, that's work in progress. It's currently being QA'd. It should be ready within the next month and a half or so. And they said that it's going to be there, right? Go ahead with it. Now, based on this promise, we decided to go ahead and start a pilot of ours. So obviously, as a pilot, I rolled out this piece of software to a smaller user group of the senior management folk, which is probably about 30, 40 people or so. And as you may guess, people don't really like to move from WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever that they're really accustomed to, right? Bringing a new chat application is really disruptive and nobody really likes it. So we ran that for a while. And obviously there was little adoption. People still continue to use WhatsApp. And finally, we had to switch to having the CEO issue a diktat saying that I'm not going to entertain chats on WhatsApp anymore. You need to come onto this new platform. This is going to be the only mode of communication, right? And typically when you're having this kind of when you're trying to drive adoption of a software within an organization, there's a carrot and stick model, right? There is something in it for the employee. There's something in it for the organization. In this case, there's no carrot. There's only stick, right? Because the CEO said it's my way or the highway. Everyone start using this. So yes, all the 30 people started using this. And now it was time for us to roll it out to the rest of the organization. But this vendor who was supposed to deliver these 2 key features for me, which was the directory integration and automated group creation, was just not able to deliver for reasons unknown to me. And I think it was probably because they were dependent on an external third-party software development organization to actually develop this code for them, whatever the reason be. We gave them 2 months, we gave them 3 months, we gave them 4 months. They were obviously extremely agitated calls, asking the vendor to come down to the office, sit with us, and saying that, look, you're making me look bad. Everything that you can guess. All these things really happened. At the end of the day, the vendor vendor did not deliver, and we had to pull the plug on this software, right? And that meant a lot of things. It meant that I looked bad in front of the organization as being in the role of a CIO because I pushed this technology to the organization. My CEO looked bad because based on my word, he kind of rolled out this diktat saying that everyone needs to get on this. And overall, the organization looked bad because it looked like we were a bunch of incompetent people who didn't really know what we were rolling out. In summary, not only did we as a customer fail, but this vendor also as a service provider also failed, because if anyone else were to come to me at that point in time, any other potential customer, I would certainly tell them, don't work with these guys. They're not able to deliver. So the simple rule is if you're already providing a certain service, or if you're looking at building a new SaaS platform or any XaaS platform, please be honest, irrespective of how difficult it may be, whether you're in sales or pre-sales or tech or product. Please make sure you're extremely honest about what you're able to deliver. And if you can't, let everyone know right up front so that nobody is in any kind of an illusion. My third point is accurately represent your products and services, right? Slightly different from the previous point, but I'll again give you maybe a couple of examples. In 2017, there was a company called Scale Factor, right? The Scale Factor came into the scene. They built an accounting software, bookkeeping for small and medium businesses, and they were phenomenally successful. Early on in their life cycle, they managed to raise about, I think, $103 or $105 million in funding from marquee investors. Huge growth, and essentially their pitch was this: that we will provide you accounting services. Our software as a service platform is able to provide accounting and bookkeeping services, and we've got the secret sauce inside, which is our own homegrown AI that makes this entire task of bookkeeping really easy and simple, right? And it was great. People bought into it. And once you have a marquee investor, right, some well-known name investing in the company, half your battle is won, right? It attracts more investors. It attracts customers. Customers know that, hey, if this big guy is backing this company, then there obviously is some meat to this. So obviously they start buying into this. And in summary, this company that got about $103 million funding in 2017 shut down in June 2020. And the stated reason was because of COVID. They said, COVID, out of our control, our business is not doing well, so we're shutting down. The real reason was something different. The real reason was that there was no secret sauce of homegrown artificial intelligence that was doing the bookkeeping. In fact, they had outsourced, they had a bunch of people who were actually sitting behind the scenes doing the bookkeeping. There was absolutely no AI whatsoever. Over a period of time, to reduce costs and other things, this team of human accountants was outsourced to Philippines. There was a team in Philippines that was doing the accounting. And customers started noticing that there were errors coming up in their accounting, and it couldn't have been due to software error, right? It was like, it seemed a lot like human errors, and people eventually found out. A lot of customers lost like tens of thousands of dollars due to accounting errors in this process. And in summary, the company shut down. Everyone, including the investors and customers who bought into this, shut down their engagements as well, right? This is a terrible story. What could have been a huge success, scale factor ended up kind of scaling down to zero. A different story, again, in one of my previous roles, we as an organization needed, for our e-commerce platform, we wanted to have our contact center to be able to assist the customers during their sales journey. So we had decided that we wanted to implement a co-browsing solution so that a service agent in the contact center is able to, at any point in time, see exactly what the customer is doing and be able to assist him or her over the phone. There's always a way that is, technically it's possible to build this. But we were a little short-staffed on our in-house engineering team. So we decided to go out and look in the market to see if there's any a product or a readily available library that could provide us this solution. And along came a very well-known large software company, right? One of the world's largest software companies that has a large suite of products. And they had a solution that was not particularly a co-browsing solution, but it was more for web analytics, right? It could record user sessions on the browser, what the user was doing on the web application, and with practically zero latency, allow a service agent in the contact center to be able to view the customer's session with zero latency. And they even did a demo for us. In the demo, everything looked good, and it looked like this was perfectly capable of serving our requirement for a co-browsing platform. And the salespeople, obviously, salespeople are pretty creative, I must say. They did kind of tell us that there were a few other organizations who were using this particular software in this capacity as well. Cut the long story short, we bought the software, we integrated our applications with it, we spent a good amount of engineering bandwidth integrating the systems, rolling it out into production. And then what did you see once it went into production? That the latency between what the end customer was doing on our e-commerce platform versus what the service agent was able to see was almost like a 6 to 10 second lag, right? There was a latency of about 10 seconds. And it's understandable. Technically, I can understand why this latency comes in with this kind of an implementation. And probably the mistake is mine, right? And my team's. We should have done our homework better. We should have been a little bit more thorough in our due diligence and the evaluation of the platform. But these things do tend to happen when you are running with multiple threads and you have a lot of things going on. You do end up at some point implicitly trusting the vendor because you had a good background with them. You have a good history of working with them as well. In summary, even before this project could go live, we pulled the plug and we had to kind of undo what we had done. The summary is, in both the story of scale factor and in this co-browsing application that I was just talking about, the vendor missold the software. right? And the capabilities of the software significantly. It would have been great because it translated into a sale in the immediate or the short term, but even not forget the long term, even in the medium term, this hurt both. It hurt us as the customer. It hurt the vendor as a software service provider. And in one case, it went to an extreme. Scale factor actually shut down. The co-browsing one, the company is still a large one. They survive. That software is not being used for co-browsing, but it's certainly being sold for a lot of other use cases. So, long story short, mis-selling hurts everyone. So, please be good. Don't mis-sell. My last point on this is stay focused, right? So there's a little story about profitability. There's this guy called Natagon. He's from Indonesia. Again, it's not a very well-known company. It's a small startup. Some years back, he decided that he ran a software development a shop, a small organization, and he was having problems in being able to track expenses in his organization, understand where his expenses are going, how is the cash coming into the organization, and whether at a project level he's actually being profitable or not, right? So he decided to kind of create his own tool and figured out that this tool is something that could probably be used by a lot of others. Converted this into a cloud hosted software as a service platform, called it profitably, and started selling it. Essentially, it was pretty simple. You create a project similar to a project management or a project tracking software. But on every transaction within the project, you kind of also specify whether you received money or you spent some money on some service or some salary or some goods. And at any point in time, it tells you what your run rate is, whether for that project you're being profitable, you're not being profitable. It's a very simple premise, but it was certainly very useful for a lot of people, particularly service providers, construction companies, consultants, software development companies bought into the software and they started using it. It's not even a long story. 6 months into this, Natagon just decided that this is not something that he wanted to do and lost interest in this. Okay. Probably this is not a very common occurrence, right? Considering that he was kind of getting in the revenues, he was getting more customers onboarded, most of us would have continued. But for some reason, Natagon decided that this is not something that he wanted to be in, and he just decided to shut shop. But what happened was it left him with a lot of very, very angry customers. A lot of them were his friends, family friends, acquaintances, former colleagues. They were very angry with him because they had essentially changed their way in which they operate their business to kind of use his software. And overnight, they were left in the lurch. And this is not just the case with small companies or like Profitably either, right? Particularly a lot of startups who have very capable products, when they get a large amount of funding or they start seeing a lot of growth, they end up obviously pivoting, changing directions, and diversifying into a lot of other areas. And some of them, in the process of doing that, they kind of lose focus on what their original product was, right? And it's very understandable why somebody would do that, because you start off with let's say a software to track expenses, and then suddenly you realize that hey, there is more money to be made in B2B expenses. Then you suddenly say someone tells you that why don't you pivot into a procure to pay kind of a platform, and then you say okay, this is more profitable, there are more customers in this, and you kind of go down that path, and then you lose focus on what your original premise or your original product was, which was expense management. And then you end up losing all those customers who came and trusted you, your loyal customers, who kind of trusted you in the first place. So in summary, please don't do that, right? Ensure your loyal customers are not left in the lurch. Now, finally, why am I saying all this? Is that whether you are a XaaS service provider or you're a consumer, you're providing services to other organizations like me and others, who are in turn providing services to other people, right? Now, why do we outsource to XaaS providers in the first place? Is because you are more capable in that. That's not our core competency. You have the core competence, and you were able to do that job better than us. So we want to entrust you with the job, which would have otherwise been critical to our organization. And we want to entrust you with it so that you can grow and we can grow as well. Whether you realize it or not, as an XaaS provider and as an XaaS consumer, our destinies are intertwined. your success depends on ours and our success depends on yours. So, and yes, in the typical sense, we are married to you, we want to grow old with you, and we want to succeed with you. So please make sure you keep us in your minds at all times. And these 4 or 5 principles that I just kind of put in place. Obviously, there are 100 of other things, right, to kind of make a XaaS provider successful. But these are, I think, hopefully a few points that you'll be able to appreciate. Not very technical, but certainly something that comes from experience. And that's all, folks. Hopefully there was something that piqued a little bit of interest, and you'll have something to think about.
Hey, Bharat, thanks for that. I could relate to a few examples that you quoted. For those who don't know, Bharat and I have worked together in the past. Bharat, there are a few questions that have come up. I'll just run them with you, and then we'll take. The first one that is on is, how does the process of due diligence look like for a software vendor, and how to catch false claims by vendors? Tricky.
There's no shortcut to this, right? I took a shortcut, and the results are here. I just showed you the what happens when you take a shortcut. One is obviously get the vendor to do a proper proof of concept for you, right? And the proof and the contours of the proof of concept need to be determined by you and not by the vendor, because it's very easy for a vendor, and obviously it takes less effort to take a canned proof of concept and show it across from one company to another. And canned POCs look perfectly well; they work perfectly fine. So if you are looking at getting the vendor to really show what's in the software, get them to do a POC, and you define the contours of the POC. You define what's the kind of data that you need to work with. You define what are the kind of users that need to be created for the POC. And that's the only way. And where I think it matters, if this requires some level of an integration with your systems for you to really, in the production scenario, make sure you go through that as well. Because integrations with your internal systems can throw up a lot more hurdles than you can imagine, right? So it's important that you kind of go through this entire motion before you really do it. In summary, you define what the POC should look like. You define what's the data that should be a part of the POC. You define who are the users who need to be a part of the POC. And if there are integrations required, you define that as well. Essentially, treat it like you would treat a UAT scenario.
Cool. The other one is for an anything as a service, would you recommend the strategy, business model, requirement, design, and identified risk areas be kept internal, and only the non-risk of coding, etc., be outsourced? Oh, that's an interesting question.
Okay, so I just also the QA. This is strategy, business modeling. See, no, I wouldn't say this. This is not exactly what I would say, Sheena. So it's not so much about business modeling, requirements, design, and identified risk, right? It is about what exactly is the problem that you're trying to solve. Okay, it's not really about. It's a level higher than what we are talking about here. You're talking about whether it's design, coding, testing, and so on, right? That's secondary. The more primary one is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And if the problem that you're trying to solve is central to the problem that your organization is trying to solve. For example, let's say a very simple one. Thoughtworks is creating this event, which is great, right? And Thoughtworks is focused on getting the right kind of speakers in, the right kind of audience in, curating this event, making sure that we have the right kind of mind share as far as this event is concerned. But maybe creating this portal for Converge is probably not their biggest, it's not something that they would want to focus their energies on, because they have to focus their energies on somewhere else. You know, the development bandwidth is better spent on someone else, but you can outsource the development of this Converge website to someone else, right? It's not really a question of whether you want to design the website and have it developed by somebody else or no, but it's a question of outsourcing the problem itself entirely, right? So that's my point.
Yeah, I think which aligns well to the next question, which is that when do you think companies should resort to an XaaS option?
I would say from day one, if possible. Be very sure about what are the problems that you're really trying to solve. Obviously, there is this entire question of cost that comes in. If you're a 2-member startup who's just starting off on day one, maybe there are some certain things due to cost constraints or other constraints that you don't want to start building yourself. But if that constraint is not there, I would say outsource what you can outsource. Move the problem to someone else who's better at doing that, so that your time is spent on solving the problem that you think you're good at. There's no reason to not use XaaS from day one. I don't think there's any. I don't think I would give any other answer to this question.
Fair enough. Sounds good. There's one more from Shivani. In an XaaS environment, customers no longer are buying a product or service. They're looking for a partner to drive outcomes. How do you think an organization can ensure they're being the right partner? Like a checklist of sorts, like quick cheat sheet for them to evaluate or sort.
Yeah. So there are broadly 2 parts, I would say. One is obviously the capabilities that their product has, right? Purely in terms of delivery. Technically, does it deliver what you want it to? Do they provide the SLAs that you require? All of that, right? That's a part of the usual due diligence that you would do anyway. But the other critical part is if you're looking at a partner, right? I mean, then that's the right way to look at it. And that's the way I've been saying is you're not buying a product, you're kind of you're getting married to a partner. That's the way you look at this. Then you certainly need to look at some of the other aspects that I just spoke about. Is the partner trustworthy? Do you trust the person well enough? See, if you're in a typical arranged marriage scenario, if you're looking at getting married to someone, obviously you're making sure that the person is of the gender that you would prefer, is of the right height, looks something that you're attracted to, has a level of intelligence, you can have a conversation, all of that. But once those basics are put aside, you're essentially looking at, can I trust this person? Can I live with this person for the rest of my life? Right? And those things start becoming a little more critical when you start looking at it, not just as a transaction, but as a partnership. And I would apply the same principle over here.
Cool. One last one, Bharat, before we... So in the context of SaaS, what do you think customers expect from banks? And I think this is partly because you've been related to the banking industry. So,
okay, what do customers expect from banks? A lot of things. Depends on who you talk to. My mother would say she wants the bank to keep her gold safe, okay, because she has a locker. So there are 2 things in my view, right? A lot of the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, I don't even know which generation we are in right now, but the current generation certainly is very demanding when it comes to technology. They want things on the phone, they want things fast, right? And a lot of I've become spoiled by choices that are available today, right? I can't remember the last time I walked into a branch. I really can't. And recently, for one of the banks that I deal with, for resetting my net banking password, they asked me to come into the branch, and I literally blew my top, escalated it to everyone in the organization, and kind of essentially sent all kind of stinker mails until I managed to get them to reset my password without me having to go to the bank. They could have done it in the first place, but still I had to do that. So we obviously look for a lot of really digital experiences, all of that. But I think the very fundamental thing when it comes down to a bank, and whether we realize it or not, is that there has to be trust. You're trusting someone with your money, right? And your money. I mean, I look at a bank, the money, your money in the bank is not really your money, right? It's gone. It's there with someone else. What you see in your account book in terms of a balance is essentially your right to borrow money from the bank at 0 interest at any time you want, right? So I have like 20 lakhs with HDFC. It just means that I don't have money, but whenever I wanted, HDFC will give me 20 lakhs when I ask for it at 0 interest, right? I mean, essentially that's the way I look at it. So trust is really very important. Tomorrow, if a bank for whatever reason don't have the right accounting practices, and they just say, yeah, I know I told you that you can borrow 20 lakhs from me whenever you want, but sorry, I can't give it to you today, then all of us are screwed. So I think the fundamental thing has to be trust. Everything else is secondary. And I think we'll see that panning out also as we go along, that trust will start playing a larger and larger role in what banks succeed and which ones don't.
Wow.